Greetings, I'm Wellbot, and Wellbot 3D Prints is kind of back. I say kind of because I've been a little bit sick. Some of you may know I've been going through quite a bit lately. I'll explain a bit about that at the end, but primary reason for my absence of videos of late is because I dislocated one of my ribs and got costochondritis, which is inflammation of the cartilage between my ribs. And I'll explain in a little bit more detail why that put my projects on hold after the jump. So stick around. Alright, so as I just said, I've had a dislocated rib and costochondritis, and the reason why that stopped me from doing very much is, as you can see on the screen now, it's a picture of my printer, and you can see the projector there hanging off a metal plate above the vat of resin, and that's set at a very low height for printing high detail small models. And for printing the hand mixer that I wanted to print, I needed to actually unbolt it from there and remount it on some higher screw holes and then lift the projector up. And given that I live alone, that was pretty much impossible to do for me, because I have to basically hold the projector in one hand and unscrew the Allen key screws with the other hand and fumble about like that. So it was pretty much impossible for me to do, and that's basically why I've been not doing videos of late, because yeah, as you can see on the screen now, this, if you can probably make out, there's a very faint red outline around the outside of the highlighted area there, and that's what is called the projection area, and that one was set to, I think, 100 millimeters wide, and for my hand mix project I needed to make it 200 millimeters. So there was quite a bit of work involved in trying to get that done. So while my projection area was set small, I did manage to print a couple of things. The first of which is a little model by Tessa, also known as Sparky Face 5. It's a little bee, and I saw her tweet saying that she would like to see it printed really small on an SLA printer or something, so I took up that challenge and managed to get that printed out. There we go, nice and focused. As you can see, there's a rather insane amount of detail. I'm actually very surprised that especially the antennas managed to print, which you can probably barely make out there. Let's see if I can get some contrast against my shirt. You just see very tiny little antennas, and they're not even a millimeter wide, which is extremely pleasing to me. I'm very surprised that they managed to print. The legs are about a millimeter wide, and I knew that it could print that kind of detail, but the antennas specifically, I was extremely surprised. But she's done a fantastic job of modelling this bee. There's quite a lot of detail, and a bit hard to make out with my low-res camera. A bit easier to see in 4K, but my computer doesn't want to play ball with that at the moment, so I'm sticking with 1080p. And yes, after that I did print one other thing which I'll show later, but once my rib was healed up, I did eventually manage to shift my projector, and what you can see on the screen now is I guess, time lapse of my hand mixer printing, which I took with my phone. Basically, just sat my phone on top of the printer and let it go. It's not the entire printing process, but as you can see, it prints using light by layer and then raises out of the bed, and this is what it produced. This is not the first attempt. This is actually the second attempt, because the first one pretty much failed. It's a somewhat difficult process moving the projector, because when I have the projector close, you don't need very much light, so brightness and contrast were set at about 0 to 10 brightness and 10 to 20 contrast, but when I move the projector up and away, there's not quite enough power for the light to harden the resin. Even though I did bump it, I didn't bump it up quite enough, so there was a little bit of playing around to get the right settings, and there's still a little bit more work needed. As you can see, it kind of printed some little flappy bits, which I believe I know the reason for, which I'll be able to demonstrate easier on a model that I'll show later. But apart from those little bits, I'm actually quite pleased with how it printed. Apart from it being a little bit small, I didn't print it absolutely full scale, but you can see the holes are nice and clean, and that's where the shaft will go to hold the gear in the middle here. And it's also holes in the bottom where the mixer shafts themselves will go, and then the handle will go through the top there. And my plan is to use this to stir my resin, because when you leave your resin sitting in your vat for a while, all the pigments and other components can just sink to the bottom, and they need to be stirred up to give you the best results. And to demonstrate that, I'll show something a little bit later. But the next thing on the agenda that I printed was this wonderful model by a guy named Yosuke Nakamura. He goes by Color 3D JP on Thingiverse, and it is Sadako from The Ring. And even though she's sort of hanging onto a pole there, I'm guessing that it's supposed to be her crawling out of the well. And it's an absolutely fantastically detailed model. As you can see, the fingers there, and they're not even perfect fingers, because as you can see, there's a little break in the hair there, and up here the fringe broke off. I'm not yet sure why that happened. I tried to print it a couple of times and it broke in exactly the same place both times, and I still can't figure out why. But as you can see, I put some drainage holes in the bottom and also in the tips of the hair there as well. But even though it did sort of fail, I'm still rather pleased with the results. It does look good despite the breakages. But eventually I tried it a slightly different way, and as you can see, there's actually supposed to be a full ring on the back. I cut it off originally to try and make it a little bit easier, so I thought, easier to print. But what I actually did with this one to try and keep the hair attached was print it upside down like that, so that the hair would be standing vertically. And I think that is the reason why this bit has all these flappy stuff here, because even though there was supports around here, as it sinks into the resin, because this bit's so light, I think it kind of stayed at the surface for a little while, so it kind of stretched out the curing. I suspect that might be why that happened. But as you can see, had a little bit of a problem printing it upside down. Top of her head's missing. It did actually print, but for some reason there was just a ring around there, and as I was cleaning it, the whole top of the head just fell off. And I still to this day cannot figure out why. Again, I printed a couple of times, and every single time top of the head fell off. I don't know why. And this one I used the same hollowing method. But yeah, as you can see, when it printed upside down, not only did the hair work better, but also the fingers themselves came out a lot nicer too. Try and get it the right way. You can kind of see on this one the tops of the fingers broke off, but eventually I did play around a little bit more and finally managed to get a good print. Top of the head stayed on, fringes all attached, absolutely insane detailing, fingers were perfect, and even the ring printed properly. I used a slightly different hollowing method on this one. Put drainage holes in the bottom, but rather than in the hair, it's very hard to make out here, but there's a gap underneath her arm there, and I've put one hole inside there and another one in the other side. And for this one, rather than print it flat like that, I printed it at an angle like that. And as you can see on the screen at the moment, that's a picture of the supports that were holding up the model, which just blows my mind how those supports even work, because they're only 1.5 millimeters wide, which really doesn't sound like it's going to be strong enough to hold it up, but it does. But the best thing about it is they're so easy to get off, because when it comes out, the resin's still a little bit soft, so you just run your finger along the supports against the model and they just fall off. And anything that doesn't quite fall off, once you rinse it in the isopropyl, everything just comes nice and clean. Of course, when I say run your finger along it, I mean with your gloves on, because last thing you really want to be doing when pulling one of these off the printer is touch it with your bare skin, because it can cause irritation. Doesn't seem to bother me much, but it's certainly not recommended. There have been a few occasions where I've got a bit on my skin, but just wipe it off quickly and it should be alright. But always recommend using gloves. But yeah, as you can see, it's a fantastic model, and I'll put a link to Yosuke's profile on Thingiverse in the description, because he's got quite a few really awesome models that I'd highly recommend checking out. They're insanely detailed and really great great. Some of them are quite creepy. Some of them are just normal but detailed people. But yeah, definitely check it out. And I'll also put a link to Sparky Face 5's little B model as well. So make sure you check that out. I'm sure she'd love to see more prints of that. Alright, and probably the reason you're all here is the Maker's Muse Egg. Will it print on a DLP? If you watched Angus's video, you may have seen him show off quite a few prints, one of which was mine. What an honour! So yes, this is that very model. And while it did fail, that was entirely my fault, because I broke it when I was cleaning it. When the models come out of my vat, they're a little bit soft, depending on the method that I use to print them. And because it is quite thin, as you can see there, when I was cleaning between the layers, I broke it. But you can see that there was actual full separation between the layers. Not anymore, because once I broke it, I just kind of gave up cleaning it. So certain bits like down the edges here have sort of fused together now. But nonetheless, it was quite impressive. I am going to give this another try at some point, because I have a feeling I may be able to do it. It's possible that the reason why it didn't quite work, or was a little bit too soft, was because I didn't mix the resin. Because as you can see here, I printed one at about 1.45 times the scale, and side by side with this one, you'll see there's a distinct color difference. This one was done with properly mixed resin, and as you can see, it's a much more vivid red color, and that's part of the reason why I plan to make my little hand mixer to help me in stirring the resin, because at the moment I just use a knife which is not much fun and quite difficult to get a good stir going. But yes, as you can see, printing it at 1.45 scale, it actually worked. Have full separation between the layers, and all the bits turn, and it looks absolutely magnificent. You might be able to work out there's a little bit of a rough texture on the surface as opposed to the small one, and that's because I printed this one a bit quicker. Because with my printer you can print in a couple of different modes. You can have it so it'll display a layer and then dip into the resin and then raise up, pause, and then display a layer, or you can just have it sink continuously in as the layers change. And both eggs were actually printed in the continuous mode, but this one was done at 0.5 millimeters per minute, and this one was done at 1 millimeter per minute. So despite this one being smaller, it took 3 hours, maybe about between 3.5 hours. This one took 2 hours and 4 minutes. So I was really surprised when I took this out and it actually worked. It absolutely blew my mind. And the only extra thing that I did to it was on the layers, very hard to make out, but you can see those rings on the bottom, which is the separation of the shells. I put supports around each ring just to raise it off the bed to give it the best chance of the base itself not fusing. And there were little tiny bits that did fuse between some of the rings, so I just took my thumbnail and ran it between the layers like that to separate them, and then between the outer two shells just at the top I had to stick my thumbnail through there just to prise a couple of them apart. But all things considered, I think I did really well, because having watched some of the videos by other people who printed them on FDM printers, they've reported having to use tools to sort of prise apart the separate shells and stuff. So I was extremely pleased. This is the first object I've ever printed on my printer that has actual nested objects. So I'm extremely glad to know that it works, and so very well as well. So yeah, that's pretty much what I've been up to. I'm not sure how long it'll be before my next video, because I have been going through a little bit of health issues. I was in hospital after having dislocated my rib because my hemoglobin count dropped to about 44 when normally it's about 135, and going through that with stomach ulcers was quite rough, and then dealing with the dislocated rib as well. And they've recently told me that I've got encephalitis, which is kind of inflammation of the brain. It's early stages at the moment, so they're kind of monitoring it, but if it gets any worse I'll have to go and probably get a spinal tap or something. And they're going to be investigating possibilities of brain tumor or something as well, so I've got to get a whole bunch of tests for those things. And yeah, if anyone wants to help me out, just have a look at the links below. I would appreciate any donations that people could provide, because I haven't worked for a couple of years now due to being sick. But yeah, I'll try and bring you some more great DLP printing action soon. And if you have any questions or anything, hit me up on Twitter. All the details on how to contact me are in the description down below. And thanks for watching. Catch you next time. And just to err on the side of caution, because I don't want to see anything happen to you people, you might want to show a friend this video within 7 days, because you never know.